Okay, we're going to give this a second go. We had some technical difficulties, but if you're able to hear us and see us, please leave us a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And we're just going to have this be part 2 of our discussion. All of these discussions are recorded and available to watch later. So if you missed the first half, if you're not able to tune in live to the second half, feel free to visit our YouTube or Facebook pages so that you can watch these live. So just to reintroduce ourselves, my name is Erica. I'm from Dogwise, and I'm joined today by Jessica, who is the author of Who is a Good Dog? And we've just been discussing what a fantastic book this is, how much I love it, and how I just want to talk to you all day about this great book. So I'm going to ask some questions, but if any of our viewers have questions, feel free to pop them in the comments and we'll share them and ask Jessica as we go. We were talking a little bit about the labels that are used: good dog, bad dog, mean dog, aggressive dog. And I wanted to jump in and say that at the end, I wanted to jump way ahead to the end. You talk about some labels that you kind of wish would leave the dog training conversation. So I do think that labels have a place, and that they do kind of help to maybe summarize the behavior or a situation that you're having or something that you're observing, but it really doesn't foster that sense of curiosity that you so eloquently are advocating for. And so when you're talking in the end of the book about things like obedience and corrections versus commands, and even the D word, there's a whole section in here about the D word, which we know is dominance and dominance-based training. But something that I really loved, I was reading this book, and I'm going to share a passage and we can discuss it a little bit, is this idea of a correction. And on page 186, 187, you're talking about some trainers distinguishing a correction from a punishment. But then you go on to say that if aversive experiences aren't essential to learning, then why use a correction in the first place? I can't get over the feeling that a correction is just a creepy euphemism for inflicting discomfort. Even worse is the phrase, offer your dog a correction, which sounds more like a treat than the forceful application of an aversive. If this isn't demeaning to dogs, I don't know what is. And I really resonated with that, because offer your dog a correction, it does kind of give me the, like, that icky feeling inside,
It's
right?
creepy. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
kind of. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and just kind of that we don't want to be using these aversives in training and that icky feeling. But I also love that you're saying, like, if we're looking at the ethics of this, what is that doing to build or hurt or harm our relationship with
Yeah.
our dog? And then you talk a little bit too about compliance and coercion. And if you're coercing your dog, and what level of training is coercion, even if you're only using positive reinforcement, which we know is not possible, that we really need to think about how we're interacting with these dogs and what we're applying and what methods we're using and what techniques maybe are not giving our dogs the sense of agency that they deserve.
Yeah. It was really interesting. I didn't plan when I started this book to write as much as I did about dog training and about behavior modification. But as I really spent time in the literature, I got more and more distressed and disturbed by the language and by the ease with which we inflict pain on our dogs. And I want to be really clear. I want us to be really clear about what we're doing, when, and why. And the language of correction is just one. It's one that I've had trainers use in trying to help me interact with my dogs better. And it's one that I've had um, heard a lot of other people use. And the way, one of the contexts in which it was used with me, and not Bella, but my dog Maya, who was
Mhm.
a dog who passed away about 6 years ago. She was a terrible leash puller, terrible. Um, and I never successfully really, she and I never learned to work together. And it was mostly me. I I didn't know what I was doing, and I had the idea that she needed to have leash manners
Mm.
instead of that she had the right to be a dog. So Um, but I remember being told, we'll give her a leash correction. Well, what's that? You yank on the leash and hurt her neck. That's not the language. They didn't say you hurt her neck, but a leash correction is you jerk the leash really hard. And I was told to, walk down the path and then turn around, and she probably won't know, so that she doesn't notice, and she'll keep going the other way and she'll get jerked. And it especially hit me when I happened upon a scientific article in the veterinary literature about the sensitivity of dogs' necks. And I had been told by this, I don't know if it was this same trainer, by another trainer, oh, Maya's neck, this is pure like folklore. She's a hunting dog. She was a German short hair mix.
Mm.
She's a hunting dog. Her neck isn't sensitive. It doesn't hurt her if you're using a choke collar or a prong collar. She doesn't feel anything. Like, well, then why is a correction useful, for one thing, or a correction? And
Absolutely.
and also, I don't think I believe you. And I
Mm.
found this article in the literature saying, all dogs' necks are very sensitive, just like the human neck. If somebody gets an injury to the neck, like they're on a backboard,
Mm.
it's code red. So why are we inflicting this really potentially dangerous and certainly painful um, experience on our dogs to help them? It's not helping them. I was going to say to help them change their behavior, but it's not, because I don't think in Maya's case, she didn't understand what I was trying to get at. She was just getting pain.
Yes.
Um, and I think especially with people who aren't trainers and don't really understand the language of dog training, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. What's a punishment? What's a reward? Like maybe somebody with a PhD in animal behavior understands those terms really, but average dog owners, I would say, 95% don't really know what they mean when they're using that language, but their trainer uses it, or the books that they see or the videos they watch use it, so they use it. And they don't understand that a correction is the infliction of an aversive experience. They might
Mhm.
not even know what an aversive experience is. And so being really clear that we're inflicting something painful on our dogs, and it's not like you're helping your daughter figure out a math problem by leaning over her shoulder and saying, oh, why don't you try this part differently? That might be a correction
Right.
that's useful, but a leash jerk is not a correction that's of any use to anybody.
Well, and
So
even as you're talking about, that I've seen that a lot where it's like the get to the end where she's at the end of the leash and then abruptly turn direction and she's not even gonna know, and then you can pop her, and it's like we're just setting her up to fail to inflict pain.
exactly.
And I think that idea
Yeah.
is that there's a phrase that I have heard before, and I keep it in my mind a lot, and it is a little bit deep if you're not a trainer, and like you said, maybe you need a PhD in behavioral assessment to know, but punishment, in the operant sense of the word, punishment is reinforcing to the punisher because it suppresses that behavior. So it negatively reinforces our, like, oh, I yelled at my dog, I applied that aversive, they stopped barking. Now that makes my behavior of yelling stronger because it got what I wanted, which was some quiet,
Right.
and I think that helps me to be a lot less judgmental of people who use training techniques that I don't agree
Yeah.
with. And I think that I think we're all subjects to these laws of behavior, these learning theories, and to be able to say, yeah, I can have some compassion for people who are doing that because it doesn't just work for dogs. The behavior work modification works for
Right.
these humans too. But I do think that I find it can be really dangerous. We see so much on social media from people who don't have PhDs in behavior analysis. They have owned dogs or have been around dogs, or they're doing what they were taught and they're doing what they were taught.
Yeah.
And it kind of those, like you were saying, those buzzwords of people using, well, I only use positive reinforcement, but not really having a deeper understanding of what that means. And then also that applying aversives or applying corrections is the
Yeah.
word that they use. But even as you said, I think that something I hope more people will do is that kind of like that icky feeling of like, this doesn't feel good when I'm hurting my dog, when I'm yanking on their neck or applying that pain or that pressure. I always encourage people like, listen to that. Yes, you have the so-called experts who are telling you here's how to get the results that you want, but also pay attention to that gut feeling that this doesn't
Yeah.
feel good, because that relationship with this sentient being who you share your life and your home with is crucial.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And one of the things that I try to explore in the book a little bit is what does it do to us
Mm,
when we, especially without really being aware of it, but also when we are aware of it, what does it do to us when we use coercion and cruelty? And that may sound dramatic to say a leash correction is cruel, but it is. I mean, that's one. I mean, we could have a long conversation about it. And I don't want to ever make anybody feel bad. Um, I I live with I'm a very like I love to feel guilty. I don't actually like it, but I'm very good at feeling guilty about all the things that I did wrong and I'm still doing wrong. Like the fact that I actually did leash corrections. Like,
mhm.
I'm sorry. And I'm sure that I'm doing things with Bella that, in 10 years with more insight, I'll be like, what was I doing?
Right.
So I think self-compassion is a huge part of this. And just we're doing the best we can. We're all imperfect. And just try to do a little better each day. And the good thing is people are strongly motivated by love. The people who read my book are not people who don't like dogs or don't like their dog
That's
or, or have a puppy mill in their backyard. Um, I don't think it'd be nice if they were, but I think I my sense from talking to a lot of people who live with dogs is that there's a lot of uncomfortable feelings that we all have about the way things are going. And I think we need to embrace those and listen to them and just be mindful about what those feelings of ick are telling us. And a lot of people that I've talked to find the language of obedience and command and compliance um, uncomfortable. And that's not how they feel about their relationship with their dog. And I think often they get the impression from trainers or from TV or YouTube that those are words that if they're a responsible dog owner, they're going to use.
absolutely.
And that is not true. That's a myth that I would like to bust open. So you don't have to, your dog has the capacity and the right to say no to you and to have her own opinion about things and to be her own person and to disobey. Um, you, we don't want robots. We want companions. And, with our human friends, we don't, most of us, and they wouldn't stick around if we did, we don't boss them around and expect them to, we don't give them commands and expect them to obey. We don't do that with our children either. We set boundaries to and we make our expectations really clear. And I think with
Yes.
dogs, we often don't make our expectations. We don't even know what our expectations are sometimes, or they're really unrealistic. I mean, people who expect their dog not to bark, not to shed, not to have to go to the bathroom. Like, what are you thinking? Not to seek attention, not to try to steal food when the opportunity arises. Um, so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think we just have some reframing we could do.
And I think that, as you were saying, we do, I think, as a society, have this idea of the perfect dog. Like you said, the good dog. That's the whole title of the book. Who's the good dog? They all are. That's the whole point. And I
Right.
think that this idea of you only have a good dog if they can walk right next to you in a heel, giving you their attention all the time. I've seen those training videos where people are like, just switch directions so your dog is always paying attention to you. And I was like, if I'm walking with another human and they're doing that, I'm going to be, after a couple turns, I'm going to be like, okay, you go do your own thing. I'm just going
Yeah.
to keep walking. Like, what is wrong with you? And that idea of, you even touch on this in the book and you say it so well, of like this idea that humans are superior mentally, emotionally, and also different, that there's something like that we're not actually also animals, that we have this like, well, we're up here, so the dogs better stay down here. And that's just like you said, not even close to true. And what is that doing for our relationship with our dogs? What is that doing for us as a society? And the fact that you're able to just tackle these really tough questions and bring them into the light to have a conversation about them is very commendable. We've got a couple of people who are commenting with clapping emojis and people who are saying that they agree. So very glad to be having this conversation. For those of you tuning in, if you have questions for Jessica, or if you have questions about the book, or if you have gotten the book, if you have a copy of the book, let us know. Leave us a comment. If you haven't gotten your copy yet and you want to, let us know. But I have a couple more questions for you. Another thing that you talk about that's sort of along those same lines, you have a lot of conversation in here about the difference between choice, agency, and control. And those are words that I've seen. Even there was a presentation I listened to one time that said choice and control, like peanut butter and jelly, they go together, but they're a little bit different. And then the conversation that you have about agency, if anyone's got the book, it starts on page 75, where you're talking about, you say, agency is the ability to make choices for oneself, to exert control over one's environment, and more importantly, to have the perception of being in control. And you're kind of identifying the different opportunities that we can give our dogs for agency. And we already talked about in our part one part of this interview that safety is, of course, very important, but giving our dogs some agency. And can you talk about how you have noticed and seen dogs not having a lot of agency, not having a lot of opportunity to control their own outcomes?
Yeah. And there are a lot of things I can think of. One that comes to mind as maybe often overlooked is, I think a lot of people think when they take their dog to a dog park, they're giving their dog agency. And some dogs might experience a dog park as um, having agency and having the freedom to run around and interact with who they want to interact with. But for some dogs, that is not a choice that they personally would like to make. And they might be really uncomfortable about being in a dog park, depending
Mm,
on who's there and what it's like. I know they're all different, but I think, if we think about giving our dogs more agency, it kind of equates into giving them more freedom. Um, Giving a dog the opportunity to have time off leash where it's appropriate and safe does increase their agency, I think, in a really positive way, because they can choose where to sniff, how to move about, um, and what they want to spend their time doing. And that's fun for dogs, just to put it bluntly. That's going to make most dogs happy. I think there are dogs for whom that would be uncomfortable too. I mean, it's one of the things, like as soon as you say something, say, well, it's not true for all dogs. Every dog is an individual. And I think that's the first thing to ask is, what would my dog think
mm,
about this? And we could talk about food and agency. I mean, one of the things that is interesting to me is that I think there's a common feeling that we're doing companion dogs who live in homes this enormous favor because we give them a bowl of kibble for free every morning and every night, and they don't have to do anything. So they're free to just lay around and watch squirrels out the window. But in some ways, that reduces a dog's agency because they are not given the opportunity to take care of those things for themselves. I mean, dogs are animals, I mean, to remember that they're descended not that long ago from wolves, and they have a lot of, I mean, the behavioral repertoire, they're not robots. They're not chia pets, and maybe even chia pets have some agency. I don't know. But dogs, certainly, they have a whole suite of behaviors that revolve around, what dogs in the wild need to do and want to do to take care of their need for nutrition. They need to stalk. They need to be watchful. They need to catch things. They need to chew on things, like tear things apart. And kibble doesn't provide them any of those opportunities. It's just calorie nutrition. So we can give them more agency by giving them the choice to have a lot of different things to chew on. Maybe this is one that sometimes it makes people raise their eyebrows, but I do give Bella some agency when we're out walking if she wants to pick up a deer leg or eat a goose poop. Like, it's not you know, we're so uptight about like controlling these things about our dogs, and access to food is one of those that they have no agency whatsoever. They don't get to decide when, and even if so many complicated things. If they do have free access to kibble in their house, they're probably going to overeat because it's like their natural feeding behaviors are not engaged. So
Yeah.
then they're going to be obese. And then that reduces their agency because they can't move about comfortably in the world. I mean, I think this might make people upset, but I think on a large scale, we reduce the agency of dogs by breeding dogs with like extreme brachycephaly, dogs whose breathing is so compromised that they can't go for walks or they can't run. Even if they wanted to chase a squirrel, they can't do that because physically they're going to, have a heart attack. And that seems like an unnoticed form of reducing agency that we inflict on dogs, and just keeping them in the house all day. I mean, it's not a natural state for dogs to be confined. And this will also make a lot of things in my book might make people upset, but I do
have
think
a discussion that is respectful, but also pushing the envelope. I think something that this book does so well, is that we're trying to have these conversations and make sure that people say, hey, there's other people out here who are thinking about this stuff. Let's talk about it. That's why we're here. So we're not but keep in mind.
So crating, I think, is a profound reduction of dog agency because they're confined to a little cage within a house. So they're doubly confined. And I understand people have all kinds of reasons for crating, but most of the time, I think it's what I would call a convenience practice. It's easier for us. It's not easier for the dog. Of course, you're in a flood or a wildfire or an extreme veterinary emergency. Like, yes, every dog should be comfortable being in a crate so that if there is an extenuating situation, you don't have to add to their stress by forcing them into this physical space where they've never been. But to leave a dog in a crate all day while you go to work reduces their chance to move around physically and interact with, even if it's just the environment inside the home, to look out the window, to drink and eat, whatever. So yeah, I could go on. Sorry, I could
No, that's
do
okay.
agency for 100 years.
I love that part of this conversation, because I think, we talked a little bit earlier about how you have to find that balance between safety and agency, right? Security and agency. What is the best way that we can give like looking at this welfare as a welfare issue of we can give our dogs some agency, but that doesn't mean they just have free reign for everything. And I love that you're even discussing, we've got some boundaries, but the idea of a crate being that's convenient for me, it absolutely is. Yes. But something that you talked about in the book is when you're walking Bella, she's on a leash, which is confinement. You have a whole wonderful section about leashes and collars and different kinds of leashes and different kinds of collars and different kinds of harnesses. And really, again, pushing that question of why are we doing what we do with these dogs and how can we be better for them? And then I think that also that idea of like, okay, we've got her confined on a collar and a leash or a harness and a leash, but can we provide her some opportunity for agency saying, do you want to go left or right? Do you want to go down the path or do you want to stay on the sidewalk? And giving her that opportunity. So
Yeah.
I do think that that is something, and you have a great section in here talking about free range dogs or free roaming dogs and looking at that behavior as well, as opposed to the behaviors of animals that do live in a house and looking at that. We did have a question from Amy, and we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer it again. Amy says, I think you made a reference to not being a trainer. What motivated you to write your book? So even though we talked about that a little bit earlier, could you give us a little summary?
Yeah, so I've written a lot about like in the realm of dog training, in the sense that so what I'm really interested in is canine cognition and emotion. And that overlaps a lot with dog training and being an ethical dog guardian overlaps with being a trainer too. So, I mean, I'm interested in training from a personal point of view because I've lived with dogs. Well, I live with just one dog at the moment, but and I have lived with dogs, and I think it's an ongoing issue of how are we gonna create a shared life that works for both of us? Um, and I've come to this isn't answering that question exactly, but I'll circle around. But I've come to not even really like the word trainer or training. Trainer's okay, like for people who do that as a form of work. Although a lot of trainers who I know don't like to call themselves trainers because it has a certain connotation to it. It's like this body of knowledge that we, the human, give to inflict upon, impose upon, um, impart upon our dogs, and that it's this one way interaction. And I think it's really a two-way interaction. Um, what motivated me to write the book is that I love dogs. And I think that dogs right now are in distress. Dogs as a whole, companion dogs. I think that they're under extreme stress and are experiencing a lot of anxiety. And some of the reason for that is the way we think about dog training. So that's why I'm interested in dog training. And that's why one reason I wrote this book. The book is there are only 2 chapters that are about specifically about training and behavior modification, but and here comes Erica. Our adventures in technology continue.
Okay, we're going to give this one more try. Let me know if you can see and hear me. We've got one really good question we're going to try and finish on here. So if you can see and hear us, feel free to let us know. If you're having technical difficulties on your end, let us know as well.